Hi, Pocket. My full rebirth into this digital world was not until recently, about a year ago, but I was a gamer long before that. Let's talk about it. But before that, weekly bounty time. This time, 3 quests in the forest, 5 Temnocerans, and 3 tempered 6 stars or higher. We've got 2 Temnocerans, Lullabarina and Nursilla, but only Lullabarina spawns in the forest, so that seems easy enough, right? Not quite. I rested about 10 times, and every tempered Lullabarina I found was only 5-star. Either I'm super duper unlucky, or tempered Lalas can't spawn 6-star. Tragic. We'll have to hunt some tempered 6-stars after cleaning up these 5 Temnocerans. Quite the curveball, but dealing with challenges, especially unexpected ones, and finding quick ways to solve them is kind of what life in gaming is all about. That's a major theme in my own gaming journey, long before my digital rebirth, when I was but a wee Pocket. I grew up with older siblings. Smart, quick-witted older siblings. The age gap between them and myself was much more vast than between them and each other, so I found myself with some distance. Before I could hold a pencil, I watched them do their homework, and before I could hold a controller, I watched them gaming. Turn-based tactics games usually, like Final Fantasy, Fire Emblem, and Golden Sun, but some action titles like Star Ocean and Tales of Symphonia. One of my older siblings taught me in Tales of Symphonia on multiplayer to stand far, far away as the character Genus and blast off spells like a black mage. They also taught me how to run in a circle in the tall grass to farm for their Pokemon, or experience and money for their characters in Final Fantasy VIII while they were busy with something else. It could barely be considered actually playing the games, but I was learning a few basic fundamentals, and my hands were getting more comfortable with the controller. The instinctual functions of these things, that circle often meant no, X meant yes, and so on. But these games were mostly single player. Eventually, as time progressed, my siblings would expand into more co-op and competitive games. Things like Champions of Norath, Gauntlet Legends, Soul Calibur, BlazBlue, and my favorite, Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. I often struggled to keep up in these titles. They were much more fast-paced than the other games, and an individual's failures could fall onto the shoulders of another. In Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, you can play with up to 4 players. Your team is restricted to a little bubble of safety in an otherwise poisonous world, and it's important to hold the Chalice, which is the center of that bubble. Carrying the Chalice restricts a player's actions and makes it so that they can't attack. So usually, if there was danger, you'd want to set the Chalice down somewhere and then fight it out within the domain of your safety bubble. As the youngest and least prepared gamer, Chalice duty was often put on me. I wasn't as good at applying my damage combos or timing simultaneous spell casts with others to combine into a higher level attack. So for the sake of functionality, I was in charge of moving and managing the Chalice. I remember once, during a harsh boss fight, I accidentally dropped the Chalice and watched as the boss wiped us all out. Sighs, grumbles, and everyone collected their hindsights. In a game of blame, how often it became my fault, and I hadn't the tools to properly argue, even if I'd wanted to. My siblings were the smartest people I knew, probably the smartest ever if you'd asked me, so I accepted every criticism. Not always kindly, but always. I even got on the game when no one was looking to practice, to memorize how long it took to lift the Chalice and how long to set it down, to try and accurately register in my brain how quickly I could move. Maybe I'd test things out, different techniques, so that I could avoid that situation, that moment, when we lost and it was my fault. Anything to avoid that. But carrying the Chalice taught me something very important. It began to introduce a fundamental knowledge of positioning, what I consider the holy grail or maybe the holy chalice of gaming fundamentals. Manipulating the Chalice meant I couldn't necessarily defeat the enemies myself, but I could control where we fought them, an important and very consequential task. Over time, I started to learn ways that I could help, if only by adjusting my own placement, to better facilitate the team. If they could fight and win and forget about me, The Chalice, it meant I was doing my job perfectly. Bounty break. Once the 5 Temnosrans were done, I just had to find a nearby 6-star tempered, and any would do. This silly Gadosha was willing enough to offer itself for the slaughter, so that's up next, just 3 of these. Especially compared to Gadosha, big brawny fella, my family and I were a scrawny batch, the typical gamer sort. But we did play games together outside sometimes. Tossing a frisbee or playing kickball, which is baseball meets soccer if you're curious. I was notably horrid at these games, so I would aim myself toward tasks that I could do, like fetching glasses of ice water for everyone or running inside to ferry messages. Those things I could do very well. I remember once I was passing some cups of water to my siblings who had been feuding with one of the neighbors. I'd been listening, so I knew the context of their conversation, but they said to me, "You're cool, Pocket." They said that, and for the first time in my life, I felt cool. I had been useful. It was precisely the prize that I had wanted all along. So the next time we got on Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, I did everything I could to achieve that response. I had to be as useful as possible. I even learned to set down the Chalice very briefly to cast a heal, or maybe a damage spell. Sometimes, on accident, I managed to time it right and combine with one of their attacks for a bigger hit. They got all the credit and first pick of the treasures when we won. But sometimes they noticed, and I was so proud. As time went on, we all aged and began to drift apart, as people do. We played different games than one another, but I found myself playing them in that same way, especially in League of Legends. Every match I played from the perspective that I had to get good enough that if my siblings played with me, I had to make sure that they had fun, that we won, and that I wouldn't be the reason that we lost. It was a lot of pressure, especially when we did happen to play with one another. Ordinary games, even ranked games alone, felt like practice matches, training for the real deal, the time when my family would play with me, and that was the most important. In those games, every little mistake I made felt so much bigger. I felt entirely responsible for their fun, and if we lost and there was something I could have done about it, then it was entirely my fault. I had to keep their attention so that they would keep playing with me. That was the whole point. But the continental drift was ceaseless, and day after day, the games we had in common became less and less. I kept asking them if they wanted to play with me, and the frequency of yeses went from rare to non-existent, until I stopped asking. I kept playing and playing and playing, trying out fighting games, MMOs like Guild Wars 2 and Eden Eternal, all with the same motivation, to eventually impress my siblings, until I realized that they probably weren't ever going to look again, and I had to ask myself the question, why am I playing? It was a difficult question. So I found a quiet place and I sat and thought about it for a long time. Hours and hours over days just thinking, which is normally how I try to solve these conundrums. But I couldn't find an answer. When I went back to playing a game, I felt sad. I hopped on Guild Wars 2, a game I'd wanted to play with my siblings, but they had all refused. I started blasting enemies, running about, and idly handling a few bosses in the area. It all felt shallow. I felt like, for the most part, I had done everything I came to do. I knew how to fight, how to handle every threat that could come my way. I had nearly mastered the intricacies of my class, on the precipice of what I deemed sufficient. What was there left for me to do, apart from wait for my siblings who would never be arriving? Was there a point? Then, I found a player who was struggling. They'd gotten knocked down by a nearby monster, an annoying mage unit. I ran over, knelt down to stabilize them, to keep them from bleeding out, and helped them handle the mage. "Thank you," they said. "How did you do that? That move just kills me." I did a bow emote. The telegraph of that spell is a little misleading. You have to dodge way later than it looks, but you'll be fine. While we were talking, the mage had respawned and started casting again. I spun around and saw in a split second that it had already started casting the spell. I dodged through it quickly, the blast knocking the other player down again. I hastily dispatched the monster and helped the other player up. "Thanks again," they said. I bowed and started to type my departure message and to log off for perhaps the last time before they said something else. "That was super cool. You're so cool." I smiled, tapped on backspace. That night, I didn't log off for a very long time. I went on a grand adventure with a new friend, through places I'd seen dozens of times, fighting monsters that I knew in and out, teaching them a few new tricks that I'd learned along the way. Things I wanted to show my siblings, things to impress them, and things that they didn't know were possible. These skills I had acquired for my siblings' sake, I learned, were not so useless. There were people out there who I could help have more fun too. I just had to use these powers for good. Strangely, nowadays, whenever I play a game with my siblings, I find myself doing very well, and I think they've come to expect it. They don't congratulate me like they once did. "Ah, Pocket just had the highest damage again," like it's a normal thing. But it's never a contest. I'm just happy not to be playing alone, so I'll make sure that we win, so that, hopefully, you want to put me on your team again next time. After finishing up all the Temnocerans in the forest, and handling those 6-star Gadoshas, I headed back to the Bounty Cat to receive my bounty treasures. Oh boy, armor spheres, hooray! Thank you for listening to my story. If it reminded you of one of yours, I'd love to hear about it. Until next time, fellow hunters, good luck, good night, and goodbye.